gun to my head right now, do I think he's missing out on this roster? No, I don't. Some things have happened that have made me wonder if there's more to his situation than meets the naked eye. Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and you can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined as always by producer JT, who you can follow on social media at JT_Runke. JT, how are you? Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Recording this on Tuesday, though, with the live show. And if you are here, appreciate you following along. But yes, happy Wednesday. And, I was talking to you yesterday, and I just like, if there are people in the comment section that would like to chime in on this, Easton, you are a fan of using catchphrases and sayings that nobody else in the world has ever heard before.
No shot. People have heard this. It's just you.
Well, no, it isn't, because we had a peanut gallery of sorts yesterday of people who have never heard these sayings that you use these a lot on the show. I do. They're a part of my regular vocabulary, and you gaslit me into looking them up to make sure I wasn't going crazy. These are both the two examples you had, of which I'm sure there's a couple that you've not remembered. And next time you come across another one, please let me know. The two examples you gave me, I looked them up. They are both very well sourced, going back hundreds of years and in plenty of literature and in text. So I know that this is something that's been around and is a common saying. And it's the kind of thing that I've grown up hearing my entire life. I don't know if it's a regional thing or what, but the first one, and I think I mentioned it for the first time yesterday, and it's the reason you brought it up, worth your salt. I referred to, if you follow any Titans broadcasters or reporters that are worth their salt. And you came to me last night like, what does that mean? Where's that from? Like, I think you could intuit what exactly it meant. Yeah, I knew what it meant. It's just like, I've never heard of it
of high quality.
Yes.
Does a good job at what they're supposed to do. They fulfill their responsibility.
Very synonymous with like pull their weight or something like that.
Exactly. And so if anybody that is with us live has or hasn't heard of that before, please go over to Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. That's Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Find this live stream and give us a response as to whether or not that is a familiar term to you. Worth someone's salt, worth your salt. The other one that I'm more shocked you hadn't heard, because this one, I swear to you, I hear it all the time on radio, in national sports broadcasts. Like, this is so common to me. I'm shocked you've never heard it. Making chicken salad out of chicken, you know what, right? Like, this is a family show, so I'm not going to finish the phrase, but making chicken salad out of chicken bleep. Like, that is something that I hear all the time. And it's another one that I'm sure you can intuit what exactly, making a positive thing come out of not so great circumstances, right? Like, it's not a difficult phrase to understand what exactly I'm alluding to. But apparently this is something that isn't entirely well known, because like you said, it was you and like 9 friends of ours last night, and I was the only person in the group that had ever heard either of these things, which made me feel like I was taking crazy pills. But I don't know. So if you're with us live, or if you're listening via podcast later, if you want to go on Twitter and hit us up, let us know if you've heard either of these phrases before, because I was with a group of 10 people last night, and I was the only person that was familiar with either of those things, which is strange to me. But today we are here to talk about the Titans, as we typically are, and we are doing a 53-man roster projection today. That is what today's show is, JT. We were talking earlier today, kind of I don't want to say slow. I don't take anything for granted after the June and July that we just escaped from, that content purgatory. We've got plenty to talk about now, but it's the first time I feel like we've kind of caught our breath since training camp has started. We've only had one practice this week. Titans are traveling today.
They're traveling today. Yeah, right. Like we could talk about like, oh, what airline are they using, and like what seats are they using, and how important is it that they get their peanuts and pretzels on the in-flight entertainment to Minnesota? I
wonder if they get the little Chex Mix things, because I like those too. But yeah. Oh, thank you, Music City Malik, here in the comments. I'm not headed to Minnesota, but I did shave today, so that's why I might look a little bit different. I'm not headed to Minnesota, by the way.
going to be here next week for joint practice between the Titans and the Patriots, but decided to stay here. Going to cover that here from Nashville. Already working on talking to a handful of my friends on the beat that are going to be there. We're going to get somebody on the show for Thursday's live recording, Friday's release. The Friday show will have somebody that was there to talk to us all about the firsthand retelling of what they saw in Minnesota between the Titans and the Vikings in what should be a pretty interesting matchup. I think there's some really interesting, and we're not going to do a Titans Vikings joint practice preview today. Like I know that elsewhere on the 440 podcast network, there's a brief podcast from the Music City Audible boys that goes over that. So if you want that today, you can do that. We're going to cover it in post, not in pre. I think that there's a handful of interesting things, like how does the Titans offensive line look up against a standard NFL defensive front? They've seen a really, really bad one in Chicago, and in practice, they face a really, really good one in the Titans all the time. What does it look like when they're facing, I think, a pretty league average-ish defensive front in Minnesota? That'll be something to keep an eye on. And then a couple of matchups. I know that a Titans cornerback has already called out Justin Jefferson, says it's on site, wants to get all the smoke this week in joint practice. So that's going to be an interesting one to pay attention to. And then just a couple of rookies here and there, looking at the quarterback competition will be an interesting conversation between Malik and Will. Looking at some of the younger guys like Tyjae Spears and how he looks, does Josh Wiley have a better run of things after a disappointing first preseason game? Do we see DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks eat the way that we're expecting them to eat against competition this year? Those are the things we're going to be talking about. That'll all be on the show with a special guest, hopefully, fingers crossed, on Thursday's live recording for Friday's show. So make sure to tune in there with us. Today, we're doing the 53-man roster projection. Felt like it was the perfect time, perfect break in the action to discuss this. And we'll discuss the final 53-man roster, which comes, for those that don't know, that decision is made on August 29th. So we are, JT, about 2 weeks away now, 2-ish weeks away from that cut down. And it's unlike in the past where they would step it down and it would go from a 90-man to like an 85 and then an 80 and then a 6 or whatever. I forget the numbers, but like they've changed it. I think this is the first year now where they go from 90-man all the way through August to 53. So there are going to be, quick math, 37 guys unemployed on that day, and it's going to be a mass exodus of players, which is going to make for an interesting dynamic, I think, around the league, because a lot of these front offices are looking on cut down days. And in the past, it was, each team bleeding off a couple guys at a time, looking around the league to see, who gets cut. No, maybe I might see some potential there. Let me grab him, or we need some depth at that position. And that team was just, they had an embarrassment of riches at tight end or whatever it may be. Let me grab that tight end they cut. That's a guy that can make our roster. This year is going to be pandemonium when each team has 37 guys released at once. And these front offices are all scrambling to try to win the free agents that they want to potentially come on their team. And then if you add some guys, then you have to cut even more guys that were on your roster. So if you make the 53-man roster initially, I'm not sure you're safe if you're on the bubble. It might be a really interesting time. So I'm excited for that dynamic. Again, on August 29th, that's the 53-man roster cut down date. But we're going to guess today. I'm going to give my best guess as to what we're going to see. And I'm assuming we'll do this again as we get close. I'll probably give my final roster prediction the week of that cut down, and we'll compare and contrast how right or wrong I might be. But going through it this afternoon, or this morning rather, preparing for this afternoon show, it was I started from scratch. I have the copy of the Titans roster in front of me from camp that they give us, and I didn't want to consult any other of my colleagues' 53-man roster projections. I wanted to see, based on my unadulterated perspective from camp so far, who do I think will make this team? And I want to make that clear. This is my best guess as to who they will pick. This is not Easton, the GM, picking who he would put on his team. There's certainly plenty of overlap there. But there were some things that we'll get to, and I'll talk about in particular, where I made a decision trying to get inside the minds of the Tennessee Titans, Mike Vrabel and Rand Carthen and the like, and figure out what they want to do. And some of these personnel decisions are made for reasons beyond just who's the better player, JT. I was talking about this on a football show, which I filled in for our buddy Zach Lyons
on Monday. Some of these things come down to if you've got two guys on the bubble that you're trying to decide between for one roster spot. Yes, ultimately, you're looking for the better player. But sometimes if it's splitting hairs, other things come into account, such as, okay, well, we've got to let one of these guys go, but we would love to keep both of them, one on the active roster and one on the practice squad. So who do we feel more confident we can stash on the practice squad and not have them vultured by another team? That comes into play, certainly with some of these bottom of the roster guys. Another thing is, okay, well, we may have an embarrassment of riches at one position and some real depth concerns at another. And so you may want to balance those out, or you may be inclined to say just, BPA, let's take the best players and put them on our team. But you also have to consider what kind of offense or defense your team is wanting to run. What does the scheme look like? If you're going to be running a lot of 11 personnel, you're going to need plenty of wideouts. If you're going to run a lot of 12 and 22 personnel, like I'd anticipate the Titans to do, you're going to need a lot of guys to keep in the box, those tight ends, those running backs. You need more of those bodies. So that comes into play as well. And Jacob Sane, one of our horsemen of the hot read apocalypse in the comments, or open court cases, certainly the kind of thing that comes into consideration. And we'll get to that when we talk about the running backs. We've also got plenty of news today with producer JT. So we'll stop in the middle. I'll cover the offense, and then we'll get some news with producer JT. We'll get the defense and the specialists, and then we'll get out of here on a Wednesday and look forward to some joint practice discussion on Thursday and Friday. JT, without further ado, what do you say? Let's get into my 53-man roster projection. And if you wouldn't mind manning the ship here, let's go position by position.
Yeah, this is probably the easiest one for you to start off with here. And it's the quarterback position, something that we've talked about all season. I think we're on the same page here, but just once again to reset the record straight on this show, what is your prediction for the quarterback position on this roster?
Well, not only are we on the same page, but we've been on the same page, JT, you and I think a lot. This is not going to sit here and say it's unique to our show or unique to us. A lot of intelligent folks have been on this from the jump. But since April, when they drafted Will Levis, and really before then, when we were talking about the potential of the Titans drafting a quarterback and adding to that room with Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis, we talked about how there's a very decent chance this team keeps all three quarterbacks. And Music City Malik saying that we did hit it first in his opinion. So I think we were among the first. I don't think that was is an unfair thing to say, but certainly something that as a community, Titans fans and media alike have come around to in one way or another. At this point, I'm not sure I've seen anybody in disagreement. But this team's going to keep all three quarterbacks. Ryan Tannehill, Malik Willis, and Will Levis will all be on this 53-man roster. And as I've said on the show, but I will reiterate once again for this exercise, the logic comes down to this. You can, on the surface, I think that the initial thought many people have is, okay, are all three good enough to keep on the roster? And the answer, in my opinion, is yes. But even if there was some debate about like, oh, man, Malik still looks really raw, or Will Levis kind of, not coming along as fast as you'd like him to, or, we just got so many guys in other positions, we'd like to keep all these guys. Well, that's where this becomes interesting to me, JT, because even if some of those quarterbacks weren't in a place where you felt really confident you needed to keep all three, it becomes a question of, does the bottom of this roster overall, does the 45th through the 53rd player that is potentially making this roster, is that group, any one in that group, more important, more valuable than keeping one of these quarterbacks? Can I justify keeping defensive tackle 7, who's not going to see the field and is likely going to rotate on and off the active roster throughout the season? He's going to be, the go-to guy that we cut when we bring in free agents to try to churn the bottom of the roster. Is it worth keeping him over one of Malik Willis or Will Levis? And the answer is, without a doubt, without hesitation, no. This team is not deep enough, not even close to deep enough, in my opinion, to justify keeping some of their bottom of the roster position players over all three of their quarterbacks. There are some teams in the league where that would become a consideration. There are some crazy deep teams like the Philadelphia Eagles or like the San Francisco 49ers, where you look at that roster top to bottom, or I would say, like the Miami Dolphins, and they've got some serious depth. Love what they're doing. And you do get down to that 45th, 46th, 47th, 48th player. And it's like, man, these are all still guys that
If we didn't keep them on the roster, there's a pretty decent chance they get scooped up elsewhere, and we think that they are worthy of making this roster. That's just not the case with this team. This team is not in a place where any of those bottom roster guys justify taking a spot from one of these two quarterbacks who, I don't think it's crazy to say, if you were to go with one of those position players and kick a quarterback to the curb, trying to keep him on the practice squad, that guy is gone like that. There is no keeping them without using up all your practice squad protections, and even then, you can't do that all season with one player. That's something that you cannot do. Whereas with those bottom roster guys at other positions, you absolutely can keep a Shaquille Brown on your practice squad and be relatively certain he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think just real quick, like we both agree on that. It's unless you're like Jacob says here, and this is an interesting thought experiment, and it kind of gets into a different realm of where the Titans want to go. But like, if you're going to put a Malik Willis on a practice squad, like eventually, like, he's just going to get picked up by another team. So might as well get some compensation for him to kind of make that seem okay and justifiable. And so he does ask, is Willis midseason trade bait? Personally, probably not. Like, I don't see a world where there's a team that actually is like looking to trade something for Malik Willis. I think it's more of like, if a team can pick him up for free off a practice squad, like that's the avenue it goes. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It's not a dumb question at all, but I agree with you very firmly. The answer is no. Again, not a dumb question, but here's the reason. Just like, let's put it out here on paper. Let's do some back of the napkin math. What reason would there be to be attempting to trade Malik Willis mid-season this year, then looking to trade him in the spring, in the summer, next August when we're ramping up for another season? There really is no, because it's not like he's a guy who's out of his contract after this year. The Titans still have him on a cost-controlled third-round rookie contract. He's costing them practically nothing. The only reason you could justify shopping him mid-season is if for some reason his price tag, the market for him would be higher in that moment than it would be next year. And the only way that happens is if, I think, one, Malik would have to continue to really show out in preseason. Like you would need to, or, God forbid, Ryan Tannehill goes down in week 4 and you get a week or a week and a half or two of Malik Willis behind the wheel, and he looks really improved over last season where we saw that same kind of thing. And that's assuming he's even the guy that gets the nod. Will Levis is still around. He's going to be on the roster. By then, who knows? Maybe he is the solidified quarterback too. But it would take a little bit of that, I think. And it would also take there being a team out there that needed to bring him in probably to be a starter. Like people aren't in the NFL looking to trade large sums of draft capital or player capital for backup quarterbacking, no matter how competent they are. Like, think about the best backup quarterbacks in the league: Teddy Bridgewater, Gardner Minshew, Case Keenum. Like, these guys are getting, in terms of contracts, they're getting their, 8, 9, 10, 12, $14 million a year for sure. But how often are you seeing them traded for significant capital in terms of draft or player capital? That's just not really a thing. Teams aren't looking to do that. It would need to be a team that, and again, I'm really having to bend the logic here for it to work, for a team to think, we lost our starter, we need somebody to come in. Malik Willis, you're our guy. Like, I don't see that being the thing. So I really don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, we can move on now to probably, in my personal opinion, one of the most interesting position groups right now with the Titans. And we'll get into some of the news. There are some additions here, some other guys with some question marks right now, and that's the running back room.
Yeah. About a week ago, I was considering keeping 5 running backs on this list for my own estimation. I ended up going with 3 today. I have them keeping the locks here. The guys you jot down without even thinking about the math are Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears. There's no debate. We don't have to talk about them. And then I have them keeping Julius Chestnut and stopping there. So I have Hassan Haskins, Jonathan Ward,
and newly acquired Jacques Patrick or Jacques. I don't know how he says his first name. It looks like Jacques. But a new running back that they added that we'll talk about in the news with JT in a little bit. I have them cutting those three and keeping Henry, Spears, and Chestnut. And here's my thinking. It was fascinating for them to bring in Patrick on the heels of a game in which Jonathan Ward, who had looked really, really nice in OTAs and had continued to look really good at the beginning of training camp in July and August, but then he gets hurt in this preseason game. And they bring in this Patrick guy, and he's got a pretty similar skill set to what Ward does. And so it makes you think, okay, we don't know the extent of his injury. What we've heard is that it's not really all that concerning or serious, but that could, does that mean he's out for a couple days? Does it mean he's out for 2 weeks? We don't know. But then you look at Hassan Haskins, who we've been talking about since July, when that news came out about his legal situation, which, need I remind anybody, that gets its first step to being resolved on August 30th with his court date, the day after the 53-man roster cut down. So you have to do some mental math here on, will the Titans be willing to part ways with a guy who there hasn't been the due course of justice carried out for him yet? Like he's literally not gotten his day in court. Is he a player valuable enough to them for them to hang around with, stick on their use a 53-man roster slot for him and see what happens and risk losing one of these other guys? We've been talking about it and we don't think that's the case. And so then it makes you wonder, okay, maybe Patrick being brought in, although he has a similar skill set to Ward, maybe he's being brought in to try to really make it easy on them to, even before the 53-man roster cut down. Let's just go ahead and move off of Hassan Haskins. Let's cut him. They've not done that. And I'm not saying that's what I think is going to happen, but it makes you wonder. That could potentially be on the table. But ultimately, I have them keeping 3. And I think that they like Chestnut. I think all along, actually, they've liked Chestnut more than most folks have. I think that the media and fans have kind of fallen for Ward. But just the vibe that I get, the way that they talk about these guys, the way that they treat them in terms of reps and which team they're running with in practice, I've always thought that the team likes Chestnut a little bit more. Julius had, and I've talked to him this summer about how he's really worked this offseason. His number one priority was working on his special teams ability. His special teams game was big to him, and he knew it is big to his coaches for him to earn a roster spot. He's one of those bottom of the roster guys that really needs to make his money on the special teams units. And to his credit, he's looked good in that capacity. He's got returner ability as well as, the ability to play on kicking team and punting team and all of those things. So I think those are the 3 they keep today, but it's a muddy, fluid situation to be sure.
Another position group here that does have a lot of question marks, and I know me and you definitely disagree on a couple of people that are most likely locks to make this position group, but right now it is very unclear about some of the spots right now with the wide receiver group.
Yeah, all along we've been talking about how this wide receiver room has 5 locks. And if you ask me, the answer is they still have 5 locks. But to be as neutral and objective as I possibly can, I think the consensus would agree on 4, and then there's some significant disagreement on the 5th. So let's say right now that there are 4 locks, even though personally I think that there are 5. Nobody is disagreeing. And I've talked to pretty much everyone on the beat about this in the last 7 days. I've talked to a lot of folks like JT and Zach Lyons and Mike Herndon. I've had this discussion because I'm curious to hear what other folks think. Talked to Braden about it on a football show on Monday. We all agree that DeAndre Hopkins, Treylon Burks, Kyle Phillips, and Chris Moore are on this team. So those are the guys that are in pen. They are on the roster. There's 4, okay? So there's 1 or 2 more spots up for grabs, logic would dictate. The 5th guy that I have all along, and a lot of people were with me, and then they've jumped ship on whether or not he's a lock, it's NWI. And I know you have some questions as to whether or not he makes the roster, and maybe some folks in the comments would like to share their thoughts or ask some questions as to why I do or do not think he'll make the roster. Yeah, Logan, very bold of me to say Hopkins and Brooks make the roster. Here's why I think NWI makes this roster. And there's some recency bias, missing the forest for the trees of this moment going on with NWI. First of all, I've said this once on the show. I'll say it 1,000 times.
until the Titans prove me wrong, this is unambiguously true. However much you like Nick Westbrook-Akine, the Tennessee Titans as an organization like him twice as much. That's the way it has always been since the moment he came into the team. And it has remained that way each and every season, both in terms of where he is on the pecking order of the depth chart and how much playing time he's getting. Like, he has been flying kind of above his station consistently, sometimes out of necessity, but I think other times just out of the love for him that this organization has. I mean, I remember a couple of off seasons ago when folks like Joe Rexford were talking about how this team thinks NWI is their wide receiver too. And that was the discussion going into the year when the Titans moved off of Jonnu Smith, moved off of Corey Davis. It was like AJ Brown and then NWI, come on down. There was reliable information from inside the Titans building that was their thinking until they went and got Julio Jones. This is, first, here's a couple of reasons why he's on this team. Besides that, okay, they love him, first of all. Second of all, he is the safe, reliable option. He is not the flashiest option. He's not the sexiest option. But he is the safest, most reliable option. He knows this team. The coaches know and trust him. He has a track record of certainly not excellence on the field, but passability. Like, he is not an active hindrance to your team the majority of the time he's on the field. He may not be a plus player, but he is not an active minus, right? And that's important to these teams, especially with depth players. You have to balance taking guys that you can trust versus guys that you see as your little pet project that you're like, oh, they may be a disaster if I put them out there too early or in a bad situation. But if I can, I can fix them. Like, I'm going to make this guy right. That's not NWI. They can trust him. He's safe. He's unsexy. He is also, outside of a man named Treylon Burks, the biggest receiver on this team. Like, I don't think folks realize this. NWI is your second biggest receiver on this team. Not close. Like, really not. He's very tall. I think he's as tall as Treylon, and he's got a bigger bodied frame than a guy of his height that is more of like a slot gadgety guy. He's got that outside, at the very least, flanker Z position, but really he's the only guy besides DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks that this team is going to trust to play that X boundary receiver. And that's a big deal. I don't think this team wants to go into the season with only two players on the roster that they trust to consistently play the X. Can they go into the year just with DeAndre and Treylon as their options on the outside when both have reasonable concerns with, their ability to stay on the field at all times? I don't think that they can, and I certainly don't think that they want to. And that's why I think NWI is going to stay on the roster, and he's a good insurance piece, as Pretty Boy Lipschitz says in the comments there. The D-Hop has missed 14 games in the last 2 years. Not a large chunk of those not due to injury, but yes, he is insurance for when he, and again, Burks missed a lot last year. It's insurance for when one of those guys goes out. You have to have, you can't rock and roll with just one guy on your roster that can play the X. I mean, you could be the New York Giants, I suppose, but the Titans don't want to be that. They want to be a team that can run 12 personnel on a regular basis, run that 22 personnel, but they can get into 11 and be comfortable with that when they're trying to throw the ball around the yard. JT, do you have a counter argument for why you think NWI won't be on this team or may not be a lock for this team?
Yeah, so just some other things here. Like before I get into mine, Jacob Sane says, I'm torn on NWI. He's so cheap and the coaches know exactly what they're getting from him. But why is he getting so many reps in a preseason game and McMath and Kinsey are outperforming him? I don't know. And I think that just plays with, he's kind of this middle ground between, yes. And Jacob says we are going to make this a 2-hour show, but I think it's important because this is a very interesting discussion. I think now you guys got me even pushing for a longer show. Good job, guys. I'm now joining Easton on this train. I think he was in the middle ground between like starter and kind of that back half group, kind of giving, like you said on a football show.
I was going to say, I'll tell you why I think that they had him out there. They wanted a quality receiver out there to be a litmus test for those. Is that what you're about to say? Like,
yes,
it's hard to judge these two quarterbacks when they're throwing to Gavin Holmes. Like, no offense to Gavin Holmes, but like you need a guy out there that you They're not a variable in the equation. They're the constant. NWI is a good constant for preseason, as is Mason Kinsey, by the way.
Yeah, and then Logan Grady says, "Isn't Dowell bigger than NWI?" Yes, Dowell is an inch taller and 2 pounds heavier than him. So by technicality,
really? Okay. All right.
A little bit.
And to be fair to Dowell, Dowell is the reason he was drafted, and the team's thinking around Dowell, by the way, is the whole idea is Dowell. They want Dowell to push and eventually replace NWI. They want Dowell to make NWI obsolete. He's just not done that yet, and we'll talk about that more in a second.
And what I was going to really say is that if you look at the snaps by position last season, especially for NWI, it's not like he is the guy who is going to be on the outside at all times. At least earlier in the season, he was getting more on the outside, but as Treylon Burks goes down and they lose some of these guys on the outside, his snaps slowly get more 50-50 even with playing on the outside and also in the slot. So I don't know how much I truly trust him to be an outside guy the entire time. However, I think we're forgetting Chris Moore in all of this. I think part of the reason that Chris Moore
as a boundary receiver, you mean?
Yes. Part of the reason I think that the Titans brought him in is that when Brandon Cooks decided to kind of quiet quit on the Houston Texans last year and not play down the stretch, Chris Moore was the guy on the outside. And like, it's not that Chris Moore doesn't have speed. He has a 4.53. Now that is an old 4.53, but 4.53 nonetheless. Like, the dude still has some speed. And as it went on through the end of the season, he started playing more and more on the outside. So I think they're really kind of interchangeable kind of players.
Okay.
And if you want to get younger and you want to have kind of shake it up. Now, I know we've talked a lot with Nick Suss on this thing. It's like, do you keep what's comfortable in what you know, or kind of shake it up? And that's a big decision. But like, I really think more and more that like Chris Moore is only an inch and like 10 pounds shorter and skinnier, weighs less than NWI. Right. Not a crazy drop off, but it is still a drop off by technicality.
It's funny because it's a bigger difference visually than that. So that's surprising.
But yeah, I really see them as interchangeable. And that's why I'm kind of like questioning NWI's kind of safety on this roster.
Well, let's look at both circumstances. Let's assume that I'm right and NWI is safe on this roster. That leaves really only one spot left, and that's what I've done in my 53-man roster. So I've got Hopkins, Burks, Phillips, Moore, and NWI as those 5. And then I've got what we've been talking about for a couple weeks now, where the shake it up candidate, the take a chance candidate, the sexy addition candidate. It's Reggie Roberson Jr. Like, he has had the best camp out of any wide receiver, I think, not named Hopkins, Burks, or Phillips. He has looked good day in and day out. He was around during the preseason game. Certainly did not become invisible. Was not the biggest guy out there, but was certainly a component of that game for them. I don't see any reason why they don't choose him over, because that's where you get to, is it Reggie Roberson Jr.? Is it Dowell? Is it McMath? Those are the 3 guys, I think, fighting for that last spot. I know a lot of people are really high on Trayshawn Harrison and Keiris Jackson. Listen, I understand the allure. I'm with you that they are sexy and fun ideas. I just don't see this team taking that leap of faith on them yet, and they are prime candidates for guys that you can probably pretty easily stash on your practice squad and not be too worried about it. They're also young and they're also raw. So they're going to want to justify keeping Dowell on this roster. I think he's the biggest, if there is a threat to NWI, maybe he's that threat, because they're going to want to keep him on this roster. But just because he's a draft pick, people need to realize, Des Fitzpatrick, a 4th round pick just a couple of seasons ago, did not make the 53-man roster. So being a draft pick for this team does not inherently mean you're going to be on the final roster. Now, he's the only guy that I have from this past draft not making the final 53. I have him just on the outside looking in, but it would not shock me at all if they kind of shoehorn him in there one way or another. If they didn't keep NWI, and so it was the 4 in Hopkins, Burks, Phillips, and Moore, who are the 2 you you would be looking for them to add instead of NWI to the 5th and 6th spot there?
Probably Roberson and then one of Colton Dowell / Kears Jackson.
Okay. Yeah, and if that were to be the case, that NWI doesn't make the cut, that's kind of what I would think that they would look to do. Although I'll add a caveat, and people won't like this. I think that our buddy Nick Suss was not wrong in saying that they like Racing McMath, and it wouldn't shock me for his special teams value as a gunner, his known quantity value as a guy that's been around, and the coaches know him and they trust him as a more veteran player. Wouldn't shock me at all if they don't go with NWI, they keep Reggie Roberson, and they go Reggie Roberson, Racing McMath. And then that brings some serious questions as to, why do you keep Roberson and McMath over Dowell? Like that would be one of those situations where I think people would have a lot of issues with that. But it's certainly a fluid situation, and we can all agree that beyond wide receiver 4 for this team, there's a lot of question marks.
Yeah, let's move on now to the tight end position that we saw a lot of them play, but we also have some injury questions and concerns with this group. So who do you have staying on the roster at the tight end position?
This one hurt me to do because I'm going to leave out Alize Mack, who I became so enamored with, but he's had injury concerns in the last 2 weeks. Didn't really get to see him in the preseason game. Did not get to see him at practice this week. As far as I'm aware, he's still nursing that injury and has kind of become a non-factor in that way. I've got them keeping 4. Chig, obviously. Trayvon Wesco, who is your new and improved, significantly improved in my opinion. Jeff Swaim, he's your glorified lineman, basically. Josh Wiley, the rookie. And I've got them keeping Thomas Odukoya, who was their international roster spot player last year and was in that designation safely on the roster for the past 12 months. But now they are kind of integrating him into the system. It would not shock me at all if this is Kevin Rader instead of Odukoya. I think that he's the other guy on the bubble there. Justin Rigg out of Kentucky is a nice rookie story, but he's not in really contention for making this roster. Rader could take that spot, and he's more of a known safe quantity, so it wouldn't shock me at all if he's the 4th guy. But the reason I have them taking Odukoya is twofold. One, my buddy Mike Herndon was talking on Twitter earlier today, and I saw the same thing when I watched some of the preseason game back about just how impressive Odukoya looked as a helper on the offensive line in the run game, kind of being a mauler, like really taking it to some guys and winning reps and looking impressive in that way. He's a big boy. He's a very strong player. He uses that play strength to his ability. And I think that this team is looking to have 12 personnel be their base. They're probably going to want 2 guys on the field for a number of snaps, assuming this offense still runs through Derrick Henry. And even if it doesn't, assuming this offensive line is still the biggest question mark for this team and may need all the help it can get, they're going to want to run a lot of snaps with 2 linemen or tight ends on the field that can serve as additional auxiliary linemen, really. And Odukoya fits that bill. He also was one of Mike Vrabel's offseason player award winners earlier this year. So clearly the coaching staff is a fan of what he's doing. And he got roughly the same snap count in that preseason game as Kevin Rader did. So it wouldn't shock me at all if he's the guy that they keep. And I'm going to go with him as my 4th right now.
Let's move on to the offensive line position here, which you got to keep more than 5 because obviously time and time again, we see injuries all the time, but who are you keeping on this roster?
Yeah, I'm keeping 9 of them, I believe, counting. Yes, I'm keeping 9. And by the way, on the tight ends, Music City Malik saying Chig, this is true. Good point. Chig said that Odukoya was the strongest player he's ever been around. Logan calls him the body mover, and Pretty Boy Lipschitz said that Thomas is a phenomenal run blocker, which is true. With the offensive line, here are the 9 I'm keeping. You've got the 5 starters in Dillard, Skoronski, Brewer, Brunskill, and Chris Hubbard, right? Those are your 5 that you got to keep. Hubbard more out of necessity than anything. And then beyond that, the 4 additional guys, I've got them keeping 5th round draft pick Jalen Duncan, Corey Levin, John Ojokwu, and Xavier Newman Johnson. That last one is super interchangeable to me. And by the way, it's also on the roster under suspension Nicholas Petit-Frere, and physically unable to perform on the PUP list is Dylan Ravens, who they'll keep around. That last spot, Xavier Newman-Johnson, could be Jordan Roos, could be Zach Johnson, could be Justin Murray, could be John LeGlue, could be Andrew Rupchich, could be Jimmy Murray. Like, there's a lot of guys that are all options that are at the bottom of this list, of Jordan Roos being the least gross of those. So it wouldn't shock me at all if he's that guy. But I've got them keeping more tackles than not because of the dire straits they are in with the tackle position. I think that Ojokwu is a pretty safe bet based on what we saw earlier in camp from him and his ability as a promising young raw tackle to potentially develop into something. The reason that we were really excited about his addition as a UDFA back in the spring, after you and I scouted him before the draft and thought that he was a really promising prospect. Duncan makes it again because of that need at the tackle position, and just, you got to have some kind of depth there, which they really, really lack. Corey Levin is a really nice backup center or guard. His ability to be a plug and play swing interior offensive lineman makes him a really valuable player, and he continues to just be that constant rock in practice that is not going to be pretty and is going to make a couple mistakes a game, but his highs and his lows are very compact, and you can trust the floor with him. And then again, Xavier Newman-Johnson kind of just grabbed the name and threw it in there. He's had some flashes in camp. He's looked fine-ish, but he certainly is not a guy you'd want to see the field at all.
I'm pretty surprised that you kept Andrew Rupchich off that list for how much he has gotten talk and has gotten the spotlight.
A lot of play from him. The problem is, in all that play, he's looked really bad. I think he's no good. It wouldn't shock me if he takes that 9th spot. It wouldn't. But based on performance, based on talent, ugh.
All right, then with the offense done, let's move over to some Titans news here before we get into
sorry,
you're good.
I'm blanking on my obligations. Well, we'll get to the defense in a moment. By the way, those of you that are with us live, thank you so much. Appreciate it. If you could do me one big personal favor before we get into the news, you know the drill. Share this with a buddy, send the link to somebody, or at the very least, just hit that like button, hit that retweet button, hit that repost button, whatever you can do to help us promote the show really quick. It takes you just 1 second, one click. It's nothing for you, but it's a big deal to us to get as many eyeballs on this show as possible. So thank you for doing us that favor. And now, without further ado, let's get into the news with producer JT.
Yeah, we got a lot of Titans roster moves that happened in the past day, and I'm sure most of you have heard about these moves, but we're going to give our reactions to them here. So let's run them down here, and then I'll let you kind of go over it. And thank you, Logan, for
Logan looking out for JT.
Battling the JT erasure. I appreciate you out here. The Titans have signed running back. I think it's Jacques Patrick. I think it's a little French. I think that's how you do it. It's
gotta be. There's no way it's Jacques or Jackie. J. Patrick.
Patrick he has spent time with 5 NFL teams, being the Bengals, 49ers, Panthers, Ravens, and Broncos. He was in the XFL this past season, which he was second in all running backs with 443 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns.
Okay.
And he has played in 2 games, both in the 2021 season with the 49ers, and tallied 2 carries for 12 yards. And with that move, they had to kind of waive someone. So the Titans waived Chris Jackson, which left Kristen Fulton as the lone Titan still on the roster from the 2020 J-Rob draft.
Yeah, I was surprised that they finally let go of Chris Jackson. He was a guy that a lot of fans had wanted off the roster for a while now, and Mike Vrabel had just kept sticking around. He was very difficult. He's a cockroach, impossible to kill. He is gone now. For now, we'll see if he stays gone, but not shocked that he is gone. He's frankly he's just too much of a liability. He was not really progressing, so not shocked that they let him go. But in terms of Jacques Patrick, first of all, looking forward to learning his name once and for all next time I'm at camp and can meet him. But I do think that his addition brings into question the status of, like we talked about earlier, Jonathan Ward and Hassan Haskins. I'm not sure if it means anything for either of them. And if it does mean something, I'm not sure for whom it means the most, but it is something that we're going to continue to monitor.
The Titans also signed defensive lineman Kyle Pecco, who previously spent time with the team. He practiced with the team as well on Monday. He comes in at 6'1", 305, and he played in 8 games for the Titans in 2021. So definitely a familiar face back in the fold. With that move, the Titans placed defensive tackle Shaquille Brown on injured reserve. He was injured in Saturday's preseason game against the Bears, so he goes to the IR spot there. And then finally, defensive back Josh Thompson passed his physical, and he has been removed from the team's non-football injury list, and he practiced with the team as well on Monday.
Yep, good to see him back, and a bummer to see a guy added to the end of their season list already. But that's the nature of the NFL.
Yeah, so those are all the Titans moves. Now we'll talk about some hot commodities in the running back room now, which the NFL has been some big names finally find teams. Free agent Dalvin Cook is planning to sign a 1-year deal worth up to $8.6 million with the New York Jets.
Hey, you know how much that changed their win total projections in Vegas?
How much?
None. Okay, wow. Next guy.
Well, as well with that, they activated running back Breece Hall off the physically unable to perform list today. So they both will be in practice, and it'll be interesting to see who gets the first back looks and who is playing second fiddle in that running back room. And then as well, Zeke Elliott also joining the AFC North as he signs a 1-year deal with the Patriots that includes $3 million base salary, a $1 million signing bonus, and can be worth up to $6 million with incentives.
Hey, you know how much that changed their win total in Vegas?
How much?
None. Both of these guys made zero impact on the odds of either of these AFC East teams. It felt like that's where these guys were going to land, and it's good to have that, that closure, that finality. I do think that they're both going to. Here's an interesting question. You're this fantasy guy that I defer to on this show. I'm sure you're going to talk about this on your next fantasy podcast, by the way.
Right after this.
Right. So which one of these guys makes a bigger impact on their running back counterpart? Is it Zeke Elliott stealing Ramondre Stevenson looks, or is it Dalvin Cook stealing Breece Hall looks?
I think right now it's Zeke Elliott stealing Ramondre Stevenson's work. Agreed. Mostly because of how much he was used last year. I mean, Ramondre Stevenson got 60% of the snaps last year as a running back for that team when Damian Harris was on that team. And I think Zeke Elliott comes in as an amazing pass blocker, something Bill Belichick really likes. Like, Bill Belichick went into the first preseason game and saw all his running backs sucked and was like, we need to go get Zeke Elliott. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's getting the goal line work. I don't think he's a factor in the receiving game, but he definitely takes a lot of touches away from Ramondre Stevenson. The only reason why I'm not saying it's Breece Hall is mostly because, like, I don't think they make this move if they truly believe Breece Hall is starting the season 100%.
Right. Agreed.
Of course, he's coming off probably an ACL injury that was probably the worst out of all of the running backs who ended with season-ending injuries.
Multiple ligaments.
I don't think Aaron Rodgers moves that money, and I think they go out and sign Dalvin Cook unless they know that Breece Hall is not going to be ready in 100% to begin the season. And Dalvin Cook is kind of that safety blanket who kind of gets you through the first 5 or 6 games. And then Breece Hall comes back and it's just the Breece Hall show. But even then, I think he adds a nice addition to that team. Kind of getting vibes of that Vince Young Dream Team Eagles team, some vibes.
Yeah.
I'm getting the vibes over there about that team, but they'll be interesting to watch.
I remember the reporting before the deal was done, and they met initially, Dalvin Cook and the Jets. There was some disagreement there between those parties as to what his role was going to be, and I think that is an indication that Breece is still that dude as soon as he's good, and that's the question, right? As soon as he is good. We don't know, but we know that Dalvin Cook is going to come in and be serviceable as long as you need him as that primary runner, that rusher of the ball. But as an auxiliary responsibility, like, he's a veteran player that still has juice that you can and Aaron Rodgers can trust in third down situations, in pass protection situations, to chip and to help and to, you don't have to worry about some young guy not knowing to slide the protection one way or another. Like, Dalvin's going to have that figured out. And there's like the Jets offensive line, they've only got one really great linemen. Like they are certainly not in a situation like the Titans are, but they are not in a place where it's not the line that Tampa Bay had when Tom Brady came to town, where he could drop back and have 3.2, 3.4, 3.5 seconds to throw and this gorgeous, clean Eagles-esque pocket every time to slice and dice from. It's not that. So I think adding him to that team in that capacity, that's part of the bigger deal, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much talent there. Like you kind of forget that. And my favorite player to forget that is on the Jets, Mecole Hardman. Like Mecole Hardman's there, as well as all of the Funky Bunch, Rogers Funky Bunch. They're all there. They brought the band back together. But it's such a star-studded offense that once again is being coordinated in the passing game by Todd Downing. So that'll be very interesting to see. Finally here, yes, a look at the rookie QBs who will be starting this year. So we already knew that the number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young, won the Carolina starting job. I think that was pretty much set in stone when he was drafted with the first pick.
Yeah.
CJ Stroud is expected to start his second straight preseason game, and it seems like he will probably be in line to start the season, although Davis Mills is always lurking in the background.
Keenum lurking, yeah.
And then finally, today, we got word out of Indianapolis camp that Shane Steichen has made Anthony Richardson the Colts starting quarterback. So he won the battle against Gardner Minshew, if you could really even call it a battle. And
listen, I'm not saying that Richardson's going to be a better quarterback and it was a better prospect than Trevor Lawrence was. But I am saying this is 2 weeks faster for Richardson to beat out Minshew in that quarterback battle than it took for Lawrence to beat out Minshew down in Jacksonville when Big Herb was running the show and Urban Meyer had them battling tooth and nail until pretty much week 1. So good for Steichen, good for Richardson, right?
That's definitely the metric there. That's what we should go off. Not that Anthony Richardson has only played 14.
That is the bar.
College / NFL games and probably just needs to be thrown into the fire. Yeah, but no, exactly. It's because he beat Minshew with so much efficiency that he is the better quarterback.
No, he is the better quarterback. And I think it was one of those things where I don't think that they were screwing around or like making it like a mentality. We got to make him earn it kind of thing, like playing with the rookie's head with making that a battle to start. Again, he has only started 14 games in college and he is incredibly raw. And so I think that they were slow playing or being cautious with the fact that, he may be an incredible athlete and may be able to do incredible things as a quarterback, but we need to see him in his ability to absorb the offense, learn the intricacies of his responsibility, be able to command that group and have a strong grasp on what exactly he's doing as a quarterback out there. The paperwork involved, the X's and O's, the mentality that is involved in being an NFL quarterback outside of just your athletic traits. And I think that they were adequately, if not above adequately impressed with his ability to command the offense and learn that scheme. And they saw what they needed to see in practice, saw what they needed to see in that preseason game, and they are comfortable with that. And of course, Pretty Boy Lipschitz, the biggest Will Levis fanboy in the world, as far as I'm concerned, is super duper out on Richardson. You'll learn one way or another, buddy. He was the quarterback 1 in this draft class. He is the quarterback 1. He's going to be very good. No, Gardner Minshew will not be the starter by midseason. If you want to be ignorant to that now, that's fine, but you will be forced to open I'm going to be like Sandra Bullock in Bird Box. I'm going to be behind you, opening your eyes in week 7 when Richardson is looking pretty decent. I'm going to force you to accept the reality that the Colts got a pretty nice starting quarterback in this draft.
And that's going to be it for our news section today.
All right, that's producer JT with the news. And with that, we return back to our 53-man roster projection. And I'll quit bullying our buddy Pretty Boy Lipschitz, who we appreciate the constant support from. The defensive side of the ball, by the way, I kept 25 guys on offense. Spoiler, I'm about to keep 25 on defense and then 3 specialists. Let's go ahead and get the specialists out of the way, maybe, because I think people can intuit who those are going to be. So obviously you're keeping your punter in Ryan Stonehouse. Obviously you're keeping your long snapper in Morgan Cox. And then it comes down to the kicking debate. And if there was a homer pick on this list that you were like, Easton was not being as objective as he possibly can be, hand up, this is the one. Like I am fully cognizant of the fact that maybe you put a slight edge on Caleb Shudak right now. I am predicting ultimately it still will be Trey Wolff. I am not giving up on the horse that we chose to back in the spring. I think anybody that says, oh, you're crazy, it's Shudak. If I asked them, okay, but by how much? No one is saying it's clearly Shudak at this point. And if you are, I think you're foolish to think that one make and one miss from different distances, both not very accurate kicks. And by the way, Shudak committing a big no-no in kicking the ball out of bounds in that preseason game. All of that comes out to you run the numbers and the calculator spits out Shudak clear kicker 1. No, I don't think that's where we're at. In fact, I know that's not where we're at. And I know that both of these guys continue to be nails in practice. And there are 2 more preseason games in which maybe, hopefully, let's say your prayers each night by your bedside, boys and girls. You need the Titans offense to like stall out in the red zone as much as humanly possible. Like I want to see 7 field goals on Saturday. That's what I want to see. I think that's important for this team. And you know what? Just send the field goal unit out there on 3rd down. I don't care. You know what? Just get out there and kick as much as humanly possible. Who cares? Let's see these kickers compete. I want to see them compete. And I think that Trey Wolff, if given the opportunity to compete, has every bit the ability and the ability. Did I say ability twice?
You did.
The ability and the ability, the capability and the ability to win that job if he's given the option. But there is no bigger coin flip for me than those 2 right now. I am really just throwing a dart and sticking with my priors, to be honest.
Well, you might be right that they should send out the kicking unit on 3rd down because, well, why do we need to work on the red zone offense? Because even when they were 32nd in offense, they're already really good at red zone offense. So it doesn't matter. Send them out on 2nd down. For
like
all I
6
care.
years of Mike Vrabel teams, infinite different variations of this offense. And the only constant is when this team gets in the red zone, they're getting 7 points. It's the only thing.
And this is something we'll just touch on real quick. But this is a point that we really had in the spring and haven't really touched since. And Pretty Boy Lipschitz brings it up. Is Ackerman on a very hot seat as the special teams coordinator for this team?
2 different questions here. Should he and is he? If the question is should he, I think that he should be on the hot seat as of like 12 months ago. Like I just think he's not a very good coach. He's been given a lot and he's a guy that has been given a ton, and each and every year in free agency, you hear about like, oh, the Titans sign, the Titans sign this guy and that guy, and they're special teams aces, and they're going to come in and be really, they add Luke Gifford from the Cowboys, and man, this guy's going to look good on special teams. He's your special teams ace. And each and every year, Ackerman just doesn't really do anything with them. Like he doesn't really produce. He's been buoyed by really, really good punting. And I guess that has erased what has been a lot of kicking woes over the last couple of seasons. So I think that he should be. Is he? Right now, I don't think so. Mike Vrabel, I think, is standing by his guy. But if there's yet another kicking fiasco this year, if special teams aren't very solid in their kick coverage and their punt coverage, they let up a couple of big returns, let up a couple of touchdowns, that could change the math pretty quickly.
Yeah, and let's move on to the defensive side of the ball here, starting with the D linemen. Easton, how many D linemen did you keep and who did you keep?
So I kept 5 defensive linemen. The obvious ones, Jeffrey Simmons, Tier Tart, and Danico Autry. Obviously, no discussion there. The 2 additional linemen that I kept, the sweetheart, I think, of the July and August that we've been through so far on the defensive line front is Jaden Peavy. We've talked about him a lot. We've heard his coaches sometimes unprompted. Big Coach Terrell Williams talks about him a good bit, just about how much they have been impressed with his progress from year 1 to year 2, but also in just the player that he is determined to become out there on the field, the effort that he gives, the energy that he has, the versatility that he's added to his toolbox. That's the thing when I've talked to him at practice that he's emphasized the most and his coaches have emphasized the most. This guy has added some real inside-out versatility, and there is some, I think, reasonable questions to be asked based on the way the coaches are talking about it. He may ultimately, by the end of the year, be pushing Tier Tart for that nose tackle position, for that starting nose tackle job.
I don't think that's the case right now. And it's not to say that Tier has fallen off in any way. He's not. But I think that they see PV as a guy that, if he continues to develop on this trajectory, can get to that place as a developing player and be on par with what Tier Tart has become, and maybe be more versatile than Tart. He certainly has a body type that I think is more conducive with versatility than Tier Tart. Tier is like built in the lab to be your run stuffing, space eating nose tackle on the center, lined up, head up on the center. Like that's what he is meant to be. Just when you look at him, PV, similar-ish body type, but more of an athlete, I would say. So I think that he is all but a lock for this roster. And then that fifth spot, there's probably going to be a fifth. I'd be kind of surprised if there's not a fifth, but it's a significant drop off. And you've got guys like Naquan Jones, TK McClendon Jr., Tyler Shelvin, newly added Kyle Pecco, and Jaleel Johnson all in that mix. None of those guys have really flashed to me. Two that I came down to were Naquan Jones and Jaleel Johnson. Jones has more actual track record with this team on the active roster, on Sundays, on the field. Very streaky player, up and down. When he's looked really good, he's looked really good. But when he's looked really bad, he has not just been completely absent, completely invisible out there. There have been times when he's been a legitimate liability for this team out there on the field. And so I went with Jaleel Johnson. This is very much a dart throw ad. It's very much I needed a body in this spot. I'm confident they keep a fifth. I'm not confident it's Jaleel. Seen some things from him, but ultimately you could convince me that over the next 2 weeks, one of Jaleel Johnson, Naquan Jones, TK McClendon Jr., Tyler Shelvin, and or Kyle Pecco has a nice heater, has a nice run where they earn that last spot. I think it's very much up for grabs.
Moving on to the edge position, a lot of guys who they brought in this offseason and some guys coming back from injury. Who did you keep in this spot?
I kept 5 at the edge position as well. The obvious ones, again, there are 3 obvious ones, and then one that I think is not super obvious to a lot of fans, but to me feels very safe. So the 3 obvious are Arden Key, Harold Landry, and Rashad Weaver. Again, no discussion over that. The 4th spot that I think is very much in the same vein as Jaden Peavy, a guy that people aren't super familiar with, is not a lock in a lot of people's eyes. But to me, I think that he is very close to being already safe on this roster, is Sam O. Sam Okwuegbunam. We call him Sam O for a reason. I can't pronounce his last name. I really should learn it. But Sam O is a guy that has had some flashes, is certainly getting run with the second team a good bit out there at practice. The team likes him a lot. He's one of those guys that is a reliable, I wouldn't say one trick pony is harsh, but he doesn't have an extensive toolbox. He doesn't have the things in his arsenal that Key or Landry and Weaver have, and that's why he's a solid peg down from them. But he's also young. He's a developing player. I think that they like the trajectory he's on, so I think that he's a guy that is in that. He certainly is in that clear 4th spot. When you look at all the other 4 guys outside of him, nobody really has pushed him for that spot, and I think they keep 5. So then it comes down to Caleb Murphy, the player out of Jackson State,
Ferris State, I think.
Ferris State. Who racked up all of those ungodly numbers at the D2 level as a UDFA. Zach McLeod and Thomas Rush, one of the Titans, I think 2 highest paid UDFAs from this last offseason. So Murphy and Rush are 2 UDFAs that for different reasons really make you wonder. They make you wonder if this team is going to want to shoehorn them into the roster by any means possible. But I went with Otis Reese the 4th. And there's just this is kind of a vibes take, but I also think that we saw some really nice things from him on tape in that Saturday preseason game 1. I'm excited to see more from him in the upcoming games. He's a guy that was brought up not unprompted, prompted, but then unprompted in the way that he lit up about him. Mike Vrabel, at a press conference that you may or may not have caught a couple of weeks ago, was asked about how excited he was to see Otis move out there. And he goes, "Oh man, I am so excited to see OTIS get out there and play. He's a heat-seeking missile. He's a headhunter." And he just kind of spent a good 20, 30 seconds ranting and raving about how excited he was to see Otis. Makes me think that they really like this guy inside that building. Wouldn't shock me if he's their 5th guy because they see a lot of potential and they like the intangibles. So he's who I'm going with for that 5th spot. But again, at both defensive line and edge, I am confident they're keeping a 5th guy. I am not confident on who it might be.
Now let's move to the linebacker position, which has had some arguments this season. That is maybe one of the top positions on this team that is worse in the depth category. Who did you have keeping on the linebackers?
If folks are just kind of autopilot listening to this show, let me get your attention, rein you back in for just a second, because this is going to be the most surprising thing I say on this list. And it may be proven the dumbest, most wrong thing I say on this list. But right now, the Titans have 6 candidates at that inside linebacker position. I have them keeping 5. And the one I have them leaving out is Monty Rice. This could be crazy. It sounds crazy. Saying it out loud makes me think that I'm saying something really stupid. And this is something that has really only come about in the last 72 hours, 108 hours, whatever it is. Yeah, Jacob Sane says, say what? Here's the thinking, okay? This is very much tinfoil hat stuff. I don't think, if you gun to my head right now, do I think he's missing out on this roster? No, I don't. But as of this second, on August 15th, Tuesday after the first preseason game, some things have happened that have made me wonder if there's more to his situation than meets the naked eye that we in the media and as fans are aware of. He only played, 6, 8 snaps on Saturday in that game. I think it was 6 or 8. I forget which, but single-digit snaps, much less than guys like Chance Campbell, much less than guys like even Ben Neiman, and of course Jack Gibbons, who got in there some and then got that starter treatment and was pulled. He also wasn't at practice on Monday. And there was no injury designation. There was no on tape. There was nothing where you saw like he came off the field kind of like gimpy. There's nothing that I'm aware of that indicates that he is hurt in any way from that game. And he wasn't at practice on Monday, and people weren't talking about him. It's just strange. The vibes are very weird around him. It started with coming into the year thinking, okay, Monty Rice better be good because he's your guy alongside Azeez Al-Shaair, like he's your starter. And then it's like, whoa, Jack Gibbons taking his spot? Whoa, Monty Rice playing with the 2s and the 3s in practice? Whoa, Monty Rice only getting 6 snaps or 8 snaps in the preseason game? And then suddenly he's missing. Like, the trajectory is bad. It's very negative on this player. I'm not sure what's going on exactly. And if you told me this is all just like it just coincidentally sounds weird, it was very conspiratorial to think that he like in 2 weeks he's very clearly on this roster. Again, I fully believe you. I think that's probably what happens. But as of right this second, I don't know, man. I think things are weird, and I don't know what is weird, but it seems weird to me.
Yeah, as you said, he only played about 6% of the snaps this past weekend. Okay. Yeah, hot take, but I mean, it could be something to monitor as we get to joint practices this week and the game on Saturday. Let's move on.
Well, actually, I just realized I kind of forgot I just ignored the rest of the position.
Oh,
so talking about the guys that are on the roster.
Yes.
Azeez Al-Shaair is the obvious one. And I think Jack Gibbons can now be put in that obvious as well. Those two are for sure making the roster. Azeez Al-Shaair and Jack Gibbons are for sure on this team. They're, I think, for sure your starters right now. Chance Campbell, I have making this team. I did predict it on this show before the preseason game that he looked good in the preseason game. And then he did. He played a lot of snaps. He's been getting a lot of work in practice, and he's also a valuable piece of their special teams play. So I think that for those reasons, he's that meat and potatoes, middle of the roster guy, you know, the heart and soul kind of guy of a team that you got to have. And I know that the coaches like him. So I think that he makes this team. I'm not too worried about him making it. Ben Neiman is a guy that's continuing to get more and more play at that linebacker position. They seem to like him as well. And then Luke Gifford was that if I'm not crazy, I think he came from Dallas early on in the offseason, was touted as that special teams ace, is that kind of guy that, you know, if he's the last guy in, that special teams acumen. And when we saw him get that punt fumble recovery on Saturday, he was the one who ended up with the ball and had got his butt all the way down there as fast as possible to land on it first. That's the kind of thing that wins you a spot on a roster. So I had them keeping 5. If you told me they end up, you know, I think that Al-Shaair, Gibbons, and Campbell, I'd be surprised if any of those guys aren't on the roster. It then comes down to Neiman, Gifford, and Rice fighting for 3 spots. And as of today, I don't know if Monty Rice is one of those spots. So right now I'm going to say that he's not.
Yeah, and then after getting that all sorted out, we're down to the secondary, which is the shallowest of all positions on this team. So we'll start with the cornerbacks. Who are you keeping?
Yeah, so the cornerback position, I've got them keeping 6. The obvious, Christian Fulton, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Roger McCreary, Elijah Molden. Obviously, all 4 of those guys are on the roster. And then it really doesn't become a debate, in my opinion. I think it's pretty clear and obvious who the next 2 guys are. Trey Avery, there's a lot of hype around him. I know our buddy James Foster has been and is big on Trey Avery as a, he's half joking about the breakout season, but a guy that is going to be a reliable part of the rotation for this team. Certainly has made plays in practice, certainly made some plays in that preseason game. And I think that they trust him and they like his ceiling, his potential. So I think that he's that 5th guy. And then Caleb Farley, I have him on here. He may stay on the PUP list going into the season and not count against the roster. I have him coming off that PUP list because I think that just the vibe that I'm getting is he'll eventually come off before the season starts. And so he'll count as one of those 53 roster spots. And so I have him as the 6th guy in for this reason. He's still on a cost-controlled contract. And for the Titans to cut him from their roster would cost them about $2 million against the cap this year. So financially, it makes not just no sense, but less than no. It makes the opposite of sense for them to cut him and take that hit against a cap number where they're already, they're not swimming in fungible money, liquidity. And so I think that he's that 6th guy, which leaves out guys like Anthony Kendall, Stephen Jones Jr., Matthew Jackson, Alonzo Davis, Eric Guerrer, and Armani Marsh. The guys that really stick out on that list are top of that list, Eric Guerrer. If you told me he makes that team, wouldn't shock me. And as Pretty Boy Lipschitz says, it's kind of a Guerrer versus Marsh competition right now. I think one of those guys makes the team. I don't know how the math works. And I'm kind of, if I were to go back and redo this 53-man roster right now, I'd probably find a way to include one of those 2 guys because they both have been talked about by their coaches and they both have shown out on the practice field and in that preseason game. And then Matt Jackson was a guy that was brought up by Mike Vrabel in his press conference on Sunday after coming back from the game, just talking about somebody that he felt was a really nice presence on special teams and did a good job splitting the double team and all of that. And so those are the 3, if you're looking for guys that might sneak in. Matthew Jackson, Eric Guerrer, and Armani Marsh are on the outside looking in, but may very well weasel their way onto the roster when it's all said and done.
And then last but not least, we have the safety position. Who are you keeping there?
The obvious guys are Kevin Byard and Amani Hooker. And then the 2 that I have, this is hilarious. Look at me. Ignore everything I said a second ago because I double listed Matthew Jackson. I do have him making this team as a safety. So I've got Kevin Byard and Hooker as the obvious ones. Matthew Jackson as the 4th guy in, leaving out guys like Josh Thompson, AJ Moore, Tyreek Jones, and Shaheem Carter. AJ Moore wouldn't shock me if they want to bring him back in, but he's consistently proven to be a health liability. He's good when he's out there, but he just can't stay healthy. And then Mike Brown is the 3rd guy on this list that I have. He's continued to look good. He's a special teams ace of sorts. He's the guy that forced that fumble on the punt in the preseason game against the Bears. So I think that he has made, and I've heard from Kevin Byard and Amani Hooker both talking about him and how they've been impressed with how he's come along and all of these things. So I think that he's somebody that they're going to keep on this roster. I'm pretty confident he makes this team. And then I think that's where Matthew Jackson gets shoehorned in. But I need to play around with this and maybe talk to some folks. Maybe Guerrer or Marsh gets kept instead of that 3rd safety. Or maybe they list Elijah Molden instead of listing him as a cornerback like I have him. List him as your 4th safety and keep Guerrer or Marsh as your 6th cornerback. I'm not sure, but it's that secondary where things get muddy with Matthew Jackson, Eric Guerrer, Armani Marsh. I think that 1, maybe 2 of those guys stays on the team. I just don't know where. The math doesn't fit yet. So I'll continue to play with that and get back to some folks.
And that's going to be your 53-man roster.
All right, so that's the 53-man roster. Whew, this took longer than I thought, but it's because we were engaged by so many of you in the comments with some fantastic conversation, and we really appreciate you guys sticking around and talking ball with us. I know that you sickos this time of year love to talk 53-man roster projections, and so we'll get back to that as we get closer and closer to that August 29th cut down day. Just a couple of things before you go. First of all, make sure you're rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the show wherever you get your good podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google
Google Play, Spotify, all of those places. Make sure you're subscribed and leaving us a 5-star rating and review. Very small thing that you can do to make a big impact on us as a budding podcast in the Nashville media space and in the national media space. And then if you are not following us on social media at Hot Read Pod, you can do so on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram. Same handle, great content and great information on shows like this live one that we're recording on a Tuesday for our Wednesday release. If you want to be a part of the conversation and catch us live, you can find all of the scheduling details for that on our Twitter, our X handle at Hot Read Pod. But make sure to follow those accounts on social media. If you're not familiar with Zen Sportsbook, they are the newest sports betting option in the state of Tennessee. They have got a new sportsbook here in town, Zen Sportsbook. You can get their app wherever you get your apps, and they do a fantastic job. We have partnered with them, and when you sign up with Zen Sportsbook, as you would with any other sportsbook, use code HOTPOD, HOTPOD, referral code HOTPOD when you sign up to get a 5% welcome bonus cash back in your pocket on all of your betting volume. JT, do you have to win those bets to see your 5% cash back?
No, you do not.
No, you do not. That is 5% cash back on any and all bets that you make for the first 15 days. And then after that welcome bonus period, 3% cash back rewards on your betting volume every month after that forever. So that being said, again, rate, review, subscribe, follow us on social media, check out Zen Sportsbook, use code HOTPOD, HOTPOD. We'll be back talking Titans-Vikings joint practices on Thursday live for our Friday morning show. Make sure to tune in with us then. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we got a fantastic guest to join us to talk all about what they saw and heard up in Minneapolis. And for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you on Thursday.